Welcome to the State of the Nation, and we are going to have some fun today with one of the people who were one of the very first guests on the State of the Nation when we started this podcast, and it was a terrible day because we were doing it live, and we were doing it live, and we had having a link by over the internet, and the next thing he had a power failure in his.
I did not have power failure. I was load shed. I should load shed.
Load shed. That's what he said when you don't pay your bill. And my interview with Bruce Whitfield was cut short, but. Joining us today is a broadcaster, author, and public speaker, well-known radio host, formerly on 702, recently departed, and that is Bruce Whitfield. Bruce, welcome back. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and now I've got no excuse. I just flicked the lights last time we spoke, because and that was it. But Jeremy Mansfield, the late Jeremy Mansfield, yes. A very distant cousin of mine, once told me a story, and he said, 6 months after he gave up on the Rude Awakening and was in the Pick and Pay in Hyde Park and was aware that he was being checked out by this guy, and this guy was looking at him, and he turned to his little girl who was with him. He said, "You see that guy there? He used to be Jeremy Mansfield. I used to be Bruce Whitfield." Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 20 years of the Money Show on 702 and Cape Talk, and you just get to a point where you go, if not now, then when?
Yes.
And it was time for a change, and it's an exciting space to be in.
Yeah, and in stepped your twin brother.
See, and people confuse Stephen Crotus and I. One day, this guy came up to me, young guy came up to me in Sandton City, and said to me, "Oh, Stephen, I love your show." And at that moment, the devil took control of me, and I issued an expletive, which was basically, "Go away and leave me alone." Right. This poor young guy's face dropped. I thought he was about to cry. And I'm sorry. It's a joke. He didn't think it was that funny. So I called Stephen. I said, "Please explain to him. Please explain to him it's a joke." Yeah. And I said, "That's Stephen, I'm Bruce." And then he was even more mortified. But anyway, yes, people have been confusing us for years. I've only ever been called Jeremy Maggs once. Maggs was called Bruce at an airport the other day. Stephen is called Bruce from time to time still. And to avoid confusion, I had to step away.
Okay, well...
we look nothing alike. Our father says so.
But now, you stepped away, but you used that experience, you put it to good use, right? And that is that you took those contacts that you had made over many years, and you bloody plagiarized everybody's stories. That's what you do now, isn't it? You've become the author that writes the stories of the people you used to interview.
It's even better than that.
Yes.
Because I hardly wrote a word of this book.
ChatGPT.
I orchestrated the book. Yeah. So what I did in the last week on the radio, I was feeling quite emotional about it. I knew that it was the right time to leave, but you have this angst that it's just one more year, and you know that it's right, so you've called it. And the head of programming, I said, "Look, you owe me some leave. Can't I just go early?" And he went, "No, come back for a week. Come on, you owe it to your listeners." I said, "They don't care." And he said, "No, they do." And it was a long back and forth. I said, "Right, but I'm not going to do any work that week. I want my producers to contact people and say, if you were president for half an hour and you could do just one thing in that half an hour, what would you do?" And they came on the radio, and there was a mixture of good, bad, and indifferent. And that suddenly sparked an idea, because at the end of June, when the radio show stopped, I suddenly had 6 hours extra in the day that I had been dedicating to the radio show, believe it or not. And I thought, well, I better do something with this hour, because it was a month before the next project was due to start. I could take it off, but well, that's for slackers. Yeah. And so I sent a WhatsApp to 120 South Africans. And I said to them, if you were president for half an hour and you could do just one thing with a compounding effect, what would it be?
Sorry, I'm just checking my phone for that WhatsApp.
As I said, 120
prominent South Africans.
Prominent and influential and hard-working, good, decent, honest South Africans.
Maybe I ran out of airtime, but anyway.
That must have been what happened.
Yeah.
And 103 of them replied. And came back with some lovely contributions. And I then took 500 words from each of them. I edited as little as possible because I wanted to be in their voice. I then categorized them into roughly 10 different categories, wrote introductions to each of them as to why I believe they are an important voice for the future of South Africa. And yes, it's an amalgamation of essays, therefore, and put it together. Terry Morris, the managing director at Pan Macmillan in South South Africa, humoured me. I said, we're going to publish this on the 1st of October. And she went, oh, no, you're not. I said, no, you're right, I'm not. You are. And I got the content to her with a week to spare on the deadline, unheard of, because people are really enthused to share their ideas of a better future for the country. We're sitting at a really interesting point in South Africa's history where the impossible has become increasingly possible. At the launch of the One Thing book, I asked Mteto Nyati to be my guest. And he is the chairman of Eskom, as you know. And on that day, on the 1st of October, we launched the One Thing book. And I said to him, please come along, because if Eskom can be fixed, and I'm not saying for a moment that it is fixed, but if Eskom can put load shedding on hold for 6 months, explain it to me, and he does very effectively. But tell me, what else is possible? Because for 16 years, we've lived under load shedding. That day that you and I were chatting, the depths of despair of COVID, we're having a conversation that people are desperate to hear, and the next thing, boom, it's gone. And it's led to a dramatic decline in investment, a loss of confidence in the future of South Africa, not only by South Africans themselves, which is the most tragic aspect of it, but by international investors. I mean, I remember being at Davos, at that spring Davos, so that would have been in 2021, April 2021, I think it was. It was winter 2020 when COVID was just happening. They had a spring one in 2021, and I was trying to get
when you did that famous interview that went viral with...
that was previously with that was
Quest.
2019 with Richard Quest.
Oh, really?
Keep up here, Mike. Anyway, I did another one at that Davos with Richard Quest, which was also very good. But at that point, he had a problem of having to explain Trump. He'd been very rude about South Africa, and he had to explain Trump to our audience at the same time, and he was very good at it. But as we sat in Davos, and I was trying to get a comment out of Patrice Motsepe, who is as elusive to South African media as
his brother-in-law.
as his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law's getting better. And he didn't want to comment. He said, but I'm going to take you into a room that you wouldn't know of otherwise. Come with me. And he took me up a back staircase up into the rafters of the World Economic Forum in Davos. And in there's Tito Mboweni, who was leading the delegation, who was finance minister at the time, and a couple of other ministers, and a tiny group of investors, one of whom was the financial director of Heineken, who was so impassioned about the continued investment by Heineken in South Africa. And she was talking about load shedding, and she was talking about water quality, because they've got that fantastic brewery in Sedibeng, of course, and they just pulled the plug on another brewery near Durban because they just couldn't the booze ban had undermined their confidence. They were just really shell-shocked. And subsequently, of course, Heineken has come and bought Distell, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting as an Africa drive for them. But there it was, that loss of confidence, and Tito couldn't give her an answer to the best of his ability because he couldn't give a guarantee on anything, because every question was pertinent to the crumbling of South Africa, this rotten from within, this loss of faith in the future. And suddenly we're at this tipping point in South Africa where the ANC loses its majority, unthinkable at the height of Thabo Mbeki, where he did get a two-thirds majority, and suddenly comes in at, 40% or thereabouts, where suddenly alliances are critical, collaboration is critical. And we don't know how long it lasts, if it lasts. We don't know how successful it will be, but there's some early indications of progress being made in government departments that wasn't being made before. And one of the key themes that come out in this book, did I mention that I wrote a book called The One Thing?
Well, you mentioned that you didn't write that book, but anyway.
The book that I've orchestrated.
Yes.
Small ideas, big outcomes, and a brighter future for South Africa, with a very fancy torch beam onto the title.
So you did the artwork as well?
I didn't actually. I outsourced that too.
Okay.
But one of the key themes that comes through in this book is the art of the possible. And one of the key themes there as well is that if we don't get the right people in the right places with the right incentives, doing the right things at the right time, there is absolutely no way that we can succeed as a country. And we've allowed degenerates and criminals and corrupt individuals to permeate our society to a point where it feels that we cannot reverse. Suddenly, things change at Eskom, new management comes in, greater political cover comes in, burn a bit of diesel, do the fixes that are necessary. Load shedding then stops. I think it was the 20th of March or thereabouts.
Suspiciously close to the election.
Suspiciously close to the elections. Everybody's going, oh yeah, we've seen this game before. Mteto Nyati, the chairman of Eskom, has rolled out on the offensive to talk about load shedding and to talk about the reality of what they're doing. Nobody believes him. They say, well, at the day after the elections, load shedding will resume. And to date, it has not. Something has changed fundamentally. Because there is, and I was skeptical of Operation Vulindlela, which is this very high-level government and business alliance, which was actually born in Davos in 2016, at the very depths of despair, when South Africa was on its knees. And Pravin Gordhan used the opportunity when nobody else came to the South Africa Centre in Davos at the Kirchner Museum, slap bang in the middle of town. You couldn't miss it. People were just not interested. And it was the saddest collection of CEOs and a couple of government ministers you've ever seen. So Pravin Gordhan took people into a corner and basically bullied them into creating the CEO network. And that didn't last very long, and trust broke down. But it was the beginning of a process which led to Operation Vulindlela, which is 4 streams of work to help fix rail, help fix electricity, help fix critical issues in the South African economy. And suddenly we're beginning to get a sense that what we thought was impossible might just be possible for the future. No guarantees, of course, because as you will learn when you read the book, because I know you will, because you're very diligent that way, because it's brand new and still smell the ink, the sense of true commitment by South Africans to the future of this country is huge.
Yes.
And people want to make it right. People want to make it right, despite all of the disagreements, the lack of trust, all of that sort of thing. And there are some remarkable ideas which people have shared in this book.
So now share some of those remarkable ideas with us, Bruce, so people can rush out and buy.
Whose would you like? I'm going to give you my... Okay, so there's a West African proverb. It says, if you believe that you're too small to make a difference, you've never been trapped in a closed room at 3 a.m. with a mosquito. Because a mosquito will ruin your night's sleep. A mosquito will deeply influence. And a mosquito is but a tiny little thing, probably the deadliest animal in Africa. And so you can accuse me of nepotism if you like, but I went down to visit my brother in Gqeberha, and I said to him, so what are you up to? And he'd been on the front page of the Herald, which is the local newspaper in PE, for fixing potholes, and he'd got a bee in his bonnet around the time of COVID, frustrated by the fact that Gqeberha was crumbling around him. And so he'd gone to a homeless shelter and said, look, if I could offer some piecework to some of the guys in the homeless shelter, would could I approach some people? And they said, sure, and they facilitated it, and he got a team of guys together, and they started filling potholes together. The newspaper got hold of this and said that's Citizen in Action. Local councillor in PE got hold of him and said, how can I help? And so this movement starts in Gqeberha, and people then start listening to what he's saying. And suddenly, different parts of the city, people are starting their own little projects, fixing up their own roads, fixing up their own areas. He's asked the councillor, he said, what else can we do? And the central in old downtown Port Elizabeth is really dilapidated. St. George's Park, that beautiful cricket stadium, has got the wonderful park around it. There's an old greenhouse in the middle of it. There's the old St. George's pool, which crumbled after COVID, sadly. But there are some wonderful assets in a park that was unused. I said, well, why don't we turn this thing around? So my brother got his team of guys in, and they went in 5 days a week, hours every single day, council workers on their phones, sitting, ignoring the work that has to be done. These guys get tree fellers in, raise the tree canopy. The hundreds of homeless people who were living in the park then felt less sheltered than they were. They moved on to other places. And suddenly, citizens of PE who pay, or Gqeberha, who pay for this facility through their rates and taxes, have been able to use it again. And recently, Bruce Fordyce and the Saturday morning runs.
Yes, the park runs.
The park runs. Say, St. George's Park, would you like a park run? Absolutely. It is now a place that we can sign off on. And suddenly this place, hope emerges. The businesses all around, which were hugely vulnerable to their clients' cars getting broken into in the middle of the day, have started funding this project. And so you get the citizen, what takes one person to take one step and to get help from others and to collaborate. And you suddenly get a sense of energy and vibrancy, which is not only isolated to that particular part of the city, but other people in other parts of the city also going, hold on a second, let me talk to my councillor and see what we can do. And you're starting to see this wonderful ripple effect coming through. And it's that thing of, if you do one thing, what is the power that you can have? And these 120 people that I WhatsApped, and I said, if you were president for half an hour and you could do one thing, what would it be? Think of the wheel. If the wheel had never been invented, the world as we know it today would not exist. We wouldn't have the transportation. We wouldn't have time as we know it, because clocks could never be invented. Gutenberg could never invented the printing press. The wheel, the person who was created it in Mesopotamia or wherever they were, was trying to move something heavy from one place to another and rolled it on a log and figured out a small section of log was easier than moving an entire log, and the wheel was born. And the wheel has had a fundamental impact on human development. Tiny impact, tiny steps. Talk to someone like Bronwyn Wilkinson, who is an economist and she is a futurist. And Bronwyn Wilkinson has written a chapter in here saying, just feed kids. If you do one thing, just feed kids. Everyone wants to stop crime and fix education. Well, one of the biggest problems education faces is that you have kids who, through no fault of their own or their poor parents, are stunted almost from birth because they don't meet the markers. I mean, you've got two very, very fine children who clearly, if they'd been tested at the appropriate stages, would have been the right weight, the right height. There would have been no sign of malnutrition or any other diseases that are related to poverty. But if you can simply feed babies, you suddenly put them on a path that fundamentally changes their future. And then education. There are about 10 contributions on education, each with different snippets and takes on how to begin fixing education. Stacey Brewer, who is the founder of Spark Schools. And she talks about integrating digital world and the real world and the physical world, and how you can fix education, and how she has approached education departments over the years. And there have been many failed projects in trying to fix it. Curo Schools, for example, offered to build schools at less than it was costing government to build schools, but there were no contracts available for that to hand out to buddies 10 years ago when Chris van der Merwe, the founder of Curo Schools, proposed this. Richard Friedland at Netcare has offered to train nurses into a field where it is massively underserved. And government says, no, that's our job. And so we are beginning to see the start of collaboration, a start of a new kind of thinking about public-private partnerships. It's not perfect. It's not going to be easy. None of these ideas on their own fixes everything. But one idea can have a huge impact if implemented. Nicky Newton-King, the former CEO of the JSE, says it's much better to have one small idea that's implemented properly than one big idea that sits in a boardroom. So this is a collection of some bigger than others, but some really quite small and simple, highly implementable ideas that, with the right people, in the right place, doing the right things at the right time, with the right incentives, can take this country to the level of growth that it needs, which is closer to 5% than the below 1% where we've been bumbling along since 2016, and actually get some gees back in the country. Got electricity. What's your next excuse?
And a lot of what you've said already is around challenging or working around the monolithic government that in many cases, rather than being the enabler of a better country, has been a stumbling block to
a stumbling block, and not deliberately, at least at first, and not necessarily understanding the consequences of being rubbish. But it's deeply apparent that the destruction of skills within the public sector, which when Nelson Mandela came in and there was this whole change in government, I remember Ken Owen writing a piece probably in 1992 or thereabouts, saying, "Dear Afrikaners, get off your butts, go start your own businesses." And he based that on the fact that in 1948, the Afrikaners had moved into the civil service where the Nats took over, kicked out the English-speaking civil servants, took over the civil service jobs, and the English-speaking South Africans had gone off and started their businesses and worked and created corporate South Africa, much in the form that we know it today, and had benefited hugely from it. And subsequent to that, of course, Ken Owen, I think, was absolutely right. There was Ken Owen. Clem Sunter made the point in a column once that Afrikaners have done considerably better since apartheid than they did under apartheid, because job reservation and telling Afrikaners that they needed to be the tapiologists on the railways and all of those sorts of things constrained many Afrikaners who couldn't get access to capital because South Africa was this pariah state. So actually you open up to the real world, and you create great businesses. And we've seen the emergence of the Capitec and the Curos and the Stadios and so many others that are sort of Afrikaner capital businesses, if you like, originally, that are doing great service to society in South Africa. In the same way, and so you were saying to them, you better get out there and go and do it. In the same way, many of the great civil servants that started out in 1994 lost hope and lost faith in government's ability and left and went to go and do other things. Some stayed in government and did considerably better, of course, and we know many of those names. And it's justice is slow, but it does grind very fine. And you see reports of some small progress being made in pursuing justice of the crooks within government. But government has betrayed the people of South Africa. 40% vote doesn't quite reflect the level of betrayal, but if you consider who turned out, actually the ANC got 15% of voting age South African support. Yes. It's got to know that the game is up if it doesn't collaborate and cooperate. Not that it will, because the ANC is still insistent on putting those stumbling blocks in place, ideologically, criminally in some cases. They still haven't learned the lesson, which is not necessarily a bad thing, frankly, because you may very well get even further transformation of voting patterns coming in future elections.
Yeah, and I've got to say, politically, I don't think it's done the renewal project any good. The fact that they've kind of remained in power, sort of given a bit of a smokescreen to the fact that the trouble that they're really in.
Oh, no, okay, I accept that. I mean, I think the president understands it, the president knows it, those close to him know it all too well. And the tests are going to come. When we get to local government elections, that's going to be a really interesting test. We drove here earlier. Joburg is not at its best. It's usually a very optimistic time of year, and springtime as the trees bud and stuff. But lights are broken, traffic lights don't work, potholes are everywhere. And my collaborator on a new book that I'm working on, Adrian Saville, once said to me, the best way for any local government to show, best way for any government to show its value is to do little things. Not quite the broken windows, Rudy Giuliani nonsense, but to go and fix the streetlights, to go and fix the potholes, to do visible things for citizens. And politicians can't even be bothered to do that.
Hardly nonsense. It is what does work.
But the nonsense of Giuliani. I mean, there's a big school of thought that Giuliani got lucky on broken windows. But the point is, if you want to prove your worth, do things that show a positive impact on ordinary people, and they will continue to support you. Stop doing that, as you have, and you will be gone.
I sometimes wonder, because by now we all know where Cyril Ramaphosa lives, and we know where Julius Malema lives. They live quite close to one another surprisingly not in Soweto. They live in Sandhurst, right? Which is quite close to Soweto.
So Julius lives in a complex on a corner, and it's very well secured. It's an extraordinary number of vehicles outside. You would swear a billionaire lived there. And then you go down through the dip and around the corner, you turn left in Sandhurst, and there are another bunch of cars where a billionaire does live. He happens to be the president of the country, and he has state protection. And they live in a very nice suburb, but even that suburb is crumbling at the edges.
The interesting thing is that the thing that always sort of gets me is those are people that drive on the same roads that we just drove on.
Yeah.
They drive through the same street lights that aren't working, and the same traffic lights that aren't working, and they hopefully get caught by the same potholes. What are they seeing?
But and you're going to hate me for this, and your mug is full, so you probably won't throw it yet. But I have huge empathy for the president. I really do. I think he's a good guy. I think his intentions are noble. I think he is hamstrung by a rotten organization that is so rotten to the core, an organization that could ultimately and probably will remove him early because he'll get to a point where he can't stand for a third term. That
lame duck time.
And he'll get to that point, and South Africa's developed a nasty habit of removing presidents early, one with absolute just cause. In Jacob Zuma, he kicked out Thabo Mbeki before his term was up. Cyril Ramaphosa is likely to face the same fate, depending, of course, on the way the politics goes within the ANC. And that's all circumspection now, of course.
I don't have as much empathy as you, and that is because I'll tell you why. Because many of the people you speak to have faced challenges within their businesses, in their organizations. You mentioned the case of your brother down in the Eastern Cape, and you do something. You don't do nothing.
I would argue that the president has done considerably more than is visible or that is appreciated, just in terms of if we think that the government of national unity was thrown together over
Yes.
2 weeks in the first 2 weeks of June, we are seriously misguided. The signals have been there for a long time. He's known that it is coming. There's been a huge amount of back channeling and work to get this government over the line. And so I think a lot of work has been done there. He's still got an international presence to keep up. And he has also had to very carefully and forensically remove as many risks as possible from within the ANC. And the difference between a chief executive or a chairman of a board and the president is the chief executive and the chairman of the board are not dependent on the exco to keep them in power. They give instruction. That exco is well remunerated. That exco either jumps or leaves and goes and finds another job if they find themselves having strategic differences. So I think the president is more constrained than in the private sector, and I think running a government is considerably more complex than running the confines of even very complicated corporate structures with 40 or 50,000 people in them. There is some degree of control. There's no control. I mean, there's got to be faith and good trust, and I think so many people in South Africa have lost so much faith in the future that they've allowed themselves to go, it's not going to hurt if I take a backhander. My children's future may depend on some money. So why don't I just, everyone else is doing it, so why don't I get in on the action? And it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic that we've allowed it to descend to this stage. And as I wrote, if South Africa was a cat, it would be rapidly running out of its 9 lives.
Did you come up with that yourself? Or did
I probably picked it up off the internet somewhere, but I put it in this context, which makes it mine. And we've had so many opportunities to turn this thing around, and we've squandered each and every single one of them, which is why the team, what is the Eskom chief executive's name?
Teto Nyati.
No, he's the chairman, the CEO. Exactly. You don't know why? Because he's fixing bloody Eskom at the moment. So Andre de Ruyter had many challenges on his plate, and I think out of sheer desperation put himself into the public eye. But how much of his book is true? Mteto and I have had that discussion. Is open for debate, and the fact that he didn't have support, the fact that he didn't play a political game because that's not his nature, meant that actually Eskom possibly suffered under his leadership, and Mteto Nyati's been able to do things differently. Right guy in the right place at the right time. You've got a CEO whose name I can't remember right now either. And when I asked that question at the book launch on the 1st of October, there were 2 or 3 hands and people had a go. But nobody knows because he's doing the job, which is, I think, admirable.
So let's talk about some of the contributions. Seeing as though you didn't write the book, the people that did write the book, some of these contributions. Let's take somebody who's got a job on his hands in turning around an organization, Sean Summers.
Sean Summers. So you will see that this is
He's
a carefully...
the CEO of
Pick and Pay. Came in at the age of 70.
Yes.
He had run Pick and Pay until about 15 years ago, and left and went to the UK and worked for Marcus Jooste for a bit. He ran Iceland, which is frozen foods business, and then had stepped away from corporate life at the age of 65. At the age of 70, was summoned by the Ackermans saying, Haka hiaka, which translates, just for anybody who doesn't know, here comes big trouble. And please come and help us, and I think one of the discussions would have been, because shareholders have been complaining about this for a long time, one of the big discussions would have been that the Ackermans can no longer call the shots, because through their control structure, through Pickwick it was called, they always had more than 50% control, so they called the shots, and no other shareholders had a voice, and that caused huge frustration. It wasn't something that Raymond was prepared to let go of, but the company has not been run in the same way. Shoprite has gone streets ahead. And huge threats coming at Pick and Pay from all directions, and Sean Summers has been brought back to try and resuscitate this thing, and whether or not he can resuscitate it, time will tell. But so in my job in this very important collaboration, because it is all about collaboration, is to get the smartest minds and to get them to give me their best ideas. And his one is take retail principles.
Sorry, I'm just checking for that WhatsApp, Bruce. Anyway.
As I was saying, I could have contacted you, but you're so busy and important. You and Mteto Nyati, you didn't respond, but did come to to the book launch. Imtiaz Suleiman, who just apologized because he's saving the world and other things. But and some people ghosted me, but that's okay. I know who they are. They know who they are. But Sean Summers take retail principles. So get your supply chain sorted out within government. You don't overpay for anything, and you don't pay for anything until it's delivered. 2 simple retail principles, and that's his thing. Just get so each person with their area of specialization is absolutely on point. That you use retail principles within government supply chains, and you narrow down the opportunity for price gouging. I mean, the stuff that Doretta did talk about at ESCOM, the 200 rand bottles of water, and the madness that people were signing off on. You know, people should be in jail for life for the damage they've done to this country. They really should. It's a crime against the country what people are getting up to.
And for cultural reasons, Stephen Saad, I have to call on Stephen Saad because, you know, us Lebanese.
Are you saying that Lebanese people are not properly represented in this book?
Not fully represented. Mind you, you've got how many stories in there? We've got one. So
it's probably represented.
Overrepresented, yeah.
You might not believe this, but it wasn't his Lebanese roots that I was tapping into first. But the fact is that there is only one global multinational that is headquartered in Umhlanga, and that is Aspen Pharmacare. A remarkable story of success, South African success, which was featured in Genius, my previous book, which I did write.
And I did
in its entirety. But they start off with this little house in Durban, and they grow by acquisition around the world. And they're the most globally diversified South African company. Stephen, on his way to work in the morning, has phone calls with people in the East. And as he goes home in the evening, he's having phone calls with people in the Americas, talking to them about what's going on in their businesses and keeping an eye on the global operations. More than 50 countries where Aspen has got manufacturing and distribution on a multitude of medications, and is a very serious world player. And Stephen Saad's, you know, because he has so much exposure to so many different people in different countries, and he can see that South Africa by no means is perfect, but it's also not the scariest country in which he does business. There are countries that are far worse governed than South Africa in which he does business, and can see the flaws in those systems too. But the one thing he says is just make it easy to do business. You know, and I remember Jacob Zuma standing up, I mean, you know, reading what's in front of him, of course, but just going, South Africa is open for business. And you go, yeah, of course it is. For whom? Et cetera, et cetera. And South Africa makes it difficult to do business. It was interesting recently seeing the president cozying up to Elon Musk in the United States with Starlink. Because
it was awkward, though.
It was awkward.
Yeah.
I mean, Elon's an awkward kind of guy, right? No doubt that he's brilliant. And the president also would be, I think, a little bit intimidated because Elon is somebody who's very outspoken. He seemed to be on the best behavior. Do we get Starlink? We certainly hope so. Because one of the great weaknesses in South Africa is the cost of access to data. If you're poor, you pay more for data than if you have a contract and you buy it by 50 gigabyte chunks. So access to the internet is really difficult. People like Alan Not Craig have tried to go into poor areas and install access, and many people have tried it with limited success. And so Starlink could make a huge impact on particularly rural South Africa, which is underserved, and provide huge opportunities, of course, for internet connectivity. So, you know, we've got these great opportunities, and we just make it difficult. So they say, but you have to tick these boxes on our behalf. I remember this is difficult because he told me not to say it. But anyway, a person who sold a business to a multinational had gone around to various government departments and had introduced the buyers to the governor of the Reserve Bank at the time, who'd said, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your investment and your faith in the future of our country. And they'd gone off to Pravin Gordhan, who was the finance minister at the time, and he said, welcome, how can we make this better for you? And they'd given him some guidance. Went off to trade and industry to Abraham Patel, who is as honourable and as honest as the day is long, but absolutely determined on, it was a former ambassador, British ambassador to South Africa, who said to Peter Bruce on his podcast, said to him, the problem with South Africa is the ANC's addicted to state-run everything. Yes. And Abraham Patel and Pravin Gordhan, late Pravin Gordhan also, addicted to state control, addicted to the developmental state, because that's what's made China great.
Yes.
In China, you break the rules, you get a bullet in the back of the head.
Yeah.
You know, people understand the rules are far more draconian and serious, and people, you know, operate at a different level of compliance. But, you know, we have to do this because that is a deeply held socialist belief, and we fundamentally disagree on it, on that principle. And Ibrahim Patel laid out the conditions. You must do this. You must local procurement. All of these things, which ultimately do well for some South African businesses, but become a stumbling block where somebody else, somewhere else in the world says, you need to set up a call center? Sure, we've got people who speak English. Absolutely. Yes, we're in a similar time zone to South Africa. Why don't you come and do it here instead?
I have to say, and you mentioned Ibrahim Patel, I've said it so many times, that the one sort of perverse joke that the ANC has always played on South Africa was to give us 20 years of ministers of trade and industry that hated trade and hated industry.
I don't know if they hated
Alec
trade.
Irwin hated trade, hated industry. Rob Davies was... Ibrahim Patel, when he did get the chance, he actually shut down business. I mean, you know...
Yeah, hatred of... that's a strong statement, Mike. I mean, it's just a different ideological bent.
Yes. Away from trade or industry.
Away from facilitating trade and industry, which, you know, when you are ideologically minded, it is very difficult, I think, to see a path of actually when you encourage growth and you encourage opportunity. Jacko Marie, for example, the former chief executive of Standard Bank, when I approached him, he said, absolutely no problem. And he was one of the first to come back to me, incidentally, because that's why he's very efficient. He gets stuff off his desk really quickly. But he said, we've got an investment to GDP ratio of 14%. It's got to be at 30%. I think it was probably in the National Development Plan. Remember that. Lovely document. If you suffer from allergies, don't go near it because it's covered in dust. And this National Development Plan talks about getting 14 to 30%. It was a plan that was put in place in 2010. Nothing has happened. Because, and Jacko's point simply is that if every policy decision you takes you closer to a 30% investment to GDP ratio, then it's a good policy. If it takes you away from it, don't do it. Actually, that's one really simple thing. Hard to do, but a really simple principle.
Easy metric to follow. Yeah.
Does this help? No, it doesn't. Go away. Think again. Stephen Saad. Does this policy that you're implementing make it easier or harder to do business in South Africa? Harder? Go away. Try again. And every government department should be put through the ringer on that one consistently. And if you apply that, you start then getting the wheels of trade and industry moving.
And Bernstein?
And Bernstein is probably one of my favorite ideas in the book. If you go out of Gqeberha and you hit the Ngqura port, there's a Cerebos salt plant on the right-hand side, these beautiful salt pans, which Cerebos salt has been harvested from there for decades, as long as I can remember. You've got this magnificent port, the Ngqura port, which is so underutilized, a deep water port, and it is a magnificent facility. And the vehicles that are made in Uitenhage, so VW, for example, has got a fantastic facility in Uitenhage. It exports out of the Ngqura port. The Ford guys, who actually are in Roslyn, north of Pretoria, engine blocks arrive from the UK in a rough form. They get put on trains. There are still trains that run. That go from the Ngqura port all the way up to Roslyn. They get then put into the Ford Ranger trucks. The finished Ford Ranger trucks are sent back down on the train, put on the ships at Ngqura, and are exported. There's a really good thing going on there, but it's massively underutilized. Next to that is this most pristine, impeccable, secure industrial estate. It's an enormous thing. I would love to actually go into Google Earth and just see how big it is. It's between the N2 highway and Motherwell Township, which is right there. Hundreds of thousands of people who are desperate for work. And one of the businesses that is in this development is got a factory about the size of a rugby field. And I went to go and visit them, and they make a sorbet called Island Way sorbet, which you've probably never tasted. It comes in a frozen fruit shell, The citrus fruit come from the Sundays River Valley and from Patterson and from that wonderful citrus growing area. They import coconut shells from India because we don't have coconuts. They make a coconut sorbet. They make a pineapple sorbet, pineapple from the Eastern Cape. And they have got this magnificent world-class facility.
Sorry, Bruce, we get it. You come from the Eastern Cape.
No, I don't. I come from the Free State.
Oh, you did spend time in the Eastern Cape, didn't you?
Lots of time in the
Yes.
Eastern Cape. I wasn't
Okay.
very bright. It took a while. But this magnificent industrial and this place was built to export one product to America. They got a contract with Target in America, and there was a TikTok viral campaign. Target made me buy it, and they had this underway sorbet in some Target shops. Demand for their sorbet rocketed. They won't tell me the numbers because it's a privately owned company, by a guy who used to work for Ceres, who then they didn't want this part of the business that he took over. He's created this business, and he must send over at least 100, are they 40-meter containers? Big containers,
double ones,
frozen containers of this stuff, floor to ceiling, packed to Target in the United States, 800 stores across the United States, and gets his product to market in the US. And Bernstein's idea is suspend South Africa's draconian laws around jobs. Don't make there a minimum wage. Don't put any of the restrictions that anybody outside of that zone faces. Do it as an experiment. And the people who set up factories there have got to have a 20-year view. They can only do business for export, and they can only hire people from Motherwell. And let's see if that works. And if you dispense of destructive regulation, and people are willing to work, and you make sure that there's no abuse. You make sure that people are treated properly. You have unions. You have all of those sort of structures around that provide protection. But is it not worth an experiment? Robbie Brosen is involved with people like Adam Craker, who's a consultant at IQ Business. And they're involved in something called Josie My Josie, trying to restore downtown Johannesburg. When Anglos moved out of Main Street, a huge controversy, of course, because they moved into Rosebank, and subsequently the head office in Rosebank has got smaller and smaller and smaller. Main Street wasn't what it was under Julian Ogilvy Thompson and all of the business legends of old, and there's an empty space. And suddenly Robbie, who loves an opportunity to bring a bit of optimism and sunshine into the world, starts going, right, what do we do? And so there's this collective of fast-thinking, smart people says, all right, why don't we try turning Joburg into a tax-free zone? Downtown Joburg. Queen Elizabeth Bridge, where the ABSA building is, where the old JSE is, and where the M2 highway is. Anybody who starts a business there, who employs X number of people, no tax. No tax. You're a tax-free zone. Imagine what could happen there. Lots of people wouldn't want to go down to downtown Joburg, not yet anyway. And maybe you put a limit on it. You say, in the next 3 years, because it takes a lot of planning and thought and everything else, but you start a business in there and you register properly and it's properly regulated and administered, and it's obviously quite complicated. But imagine what you could do to downtown Johannesburg in terms of reviving what you'll remember, because you were involved with the JSE when they were in Diagonal Street and stuff. It was a vibrant, lekker place. Now you walk around Joburg.
No, you don't walk around Joburg.
I know. I needed a new passport.
Yes.
I took the Gautrain into Park Station, thinking I could get an Uber. At the time, the Uber guys were being beaten up and burned and stuff, and I couldn't get an Uber. And I stuff this, and I had my backpack on my back, and I walked from Park Station across Queen Elizabeth Bridge, and to an FNB branch across the road from Lutuli House, and I think people were frightened, genuinely frightened of me looking the way I do, being in an environment where people who look like me don't often present themselves. And I felt like Moses must have felt when he arrived at the Red Sea, because people just parted, and there was a fair amount of trepidation. I was greeting people and being friendly to people and being very nice to people, and a couple greeted me back. But mostly people were going, hey, what you doing? And that should not be normal. That should not be normal. What should be normal is my ability to walk wherever the hell I want, to go and do as I please when I need safety, to. And I made my application. The guys at the bank said, "Oh, how did you get here? Where did you park?" I went, "No, I walked." You did what? And a week later, my passport was delivered. That time I did Uber to this thing because I was, you don't try your luck twice. Picked up my passport a week later, and off I went to see Warren Buffett in Omaha, Nebraska. That was it was a last-minute thing, and my passport had unfortunately expired.
Nice. Now, Bruce, I want to close off because you're now an international man of mystery, a man of letters, other people's letters, but still a man of letters.
Oh, stop! Wind your neck. Yes.
So
everyone needs somebody to harness a collaborative instinct.
You're like the conductor of the orchestra.
Well, no, actually. I wish I was. Ralph Schmidt is a wonderful conductor of an orchestra. And his idea in this book, Ralph Schmidt, the guy who took the Mzansi Choir all the way to America's Got Talent, he's a conductor of extraordinary proportions. His idea is brilliant on how to get hope and culture and optimism into lives of young people. Anyway, yes, so I am an international man of mystery.
What was his idea?
You'll have to read the book. I've given away enough.
Oh, you're giving it. Oh, it's like that, is it? And that is, Bruce, I'm just going to close off by saying you're spending a lot of time around the world.
I've done some consulting in Dubai.
Some consulting.
I'm doing some speaking in the UK, looking at some opportunities in the US at the moment, taking the principles that I've learned in South Africa, of which there are many. And I went to the Financial Times. FTE do a wonderful weekend, very expensive day in the sun when it is sunny, and they always happen to find the one sunny day. And I walked into this event, and it's marquees, and it's paradise. It's beautiful. They're lovely canapes and English champagne, which isn't, don't drink it, and all sorts of things. And I just looked at the people around me, and I sat in some of the discussions that were happening. And the level of depression and morbidity and defeat in the minds of the 15,000 people who were at this gathering was palpable. I thought, this feels like South Africa. This is like the ultimate Eeyore nation.
Yes.
It is a place that doesn't know how good it's got it. Things are not working as well as they should, but there are many parallels in many parts of the world. You look at the MAGA movement in the United States, and you look at the people who are blindly following Donald Trump's political agenda because they feel marginalized, they feel ostracized, that things aren't working the way they should for them. And when I interviewed David Blunkett, who was the Home Secretary to Tony Blair, it was blind guy. And but he had remarkable foresight. I remember interviewing him in the 2008 financial crisis, and I said to him, "What's the consequence of this financial crisis?" And he leapt forward to now, and he said, "You'll see Europe going increasingly right-wing. You'll start seeing the liberal democracies come under huge strain because there is going to be so much pressure as a result of this crisis that you will see military spending in the Middle East begin to decrease from the United States. You will see the United States reduce its dependency on oil, on Middle Eastern oil. You will see that policeman status disappear. You will start seeing the emergence of economies in Southeast Asia and in China. You will start seeing all of these things happening. It's going to cause huge instability. You'll start seeing mass migration. That leads to a right-wing response by conservatives within Europe who are waiting for an opportunity. And you start seeing it happening in European countries now. The unthinkable is happening in many of these economies because a lot of people around the world feel disenfranchised. We navel gaze a lot in South Africa. We feel very, very hard done by. But what most countries don't have is an extraordinary set of business leaders, intellectuals, civil society individuals who are so hell-bent on the South Africa project, knowing that nobody's coming to rescue us. People have lost faith in us a long time ago, and with just cause, because we allowed Jacob Zuma to happen, and we, broadly speaking, allowed him to get away with his nonsense, allowed his friends to get away with his nonsense, but the fight back began in 2016. And it takes an awfully long time to undo damage. You can do damage really quickly. But the compounding effect of the right people in the right positions, taking the right actions for the right purpose, which is the upliftment of South Africa, which is what this book, which I've been lucky enough to orchestrate, is all about.
Okay. Well,
just one thing. Do one thing.
Yes.
And focus on that one thing and let other people do their one things. And gradually you start seeing improvement.
Well, there we have Bruce Whitfield, and here we are. It's October, November, December, so it's in time for Christmas.
You would think that I would do this for commercial purposes. Yes, absolutely. It's in time for Christmas, which is why it had to come out on the 1st of October.
And if you're really smart, what you can do is buy it now, read it, and give it to somebody else as a Christmas present after you've read it.
And you know what? I don't mind.
You don't mind.
I love the fact. A friend of mine who was on holiday in Mozambique recently, you go to hotels and things, and there was a very well-thumbed copy of Genius in a tub of other books at this resort that she was at. And so I said, yeah, good. The book is going global, which is nice. Mozambique is not in South Africa. Exactly.
It's on the globe. But, it's so good to have Bruce Whitfield back with us.
Mighty Mike Sham, very nice to see you.
Lovely to see you.
What's your take on the state of the nation?
My take?
Or is everyone sick of your take of the state of the
no,
nation?
Everyone's sick of my take. But I'm actually aggressively optimistic.
What is your definition of optimism?
Is that I think that South Africa has got so many indicators in the right direction, right? That we aren't looking at. For example, we have got a wonderfully large, very creative, entrepreneurial nation.
So, two people who talk to that point, Adrian Gore and also Gigi Alcock, who talks very strongly towards precisely that in the informal economy in South Africa. We're not harnessing that.
We're not harnessing that, and I use a very perverse measure for which is a bit of a nasty thing to bring up, but I think it makes a point. And that is, I've had people sit here and say that South Africa's in real trouble because people are literally, so poor, grinding poverty, that they're living off this 350 Rand grant, which is now 370 Rand. And my comeback to that is...
Bullshit.
Nobody can live off that grant.
Correct.
And if people were not a little bit more resourceful than what you're giving them credit for, sir, we'd have a massive number of people dying of starvation in the street.
No, but that is one. And look, there are many people who are malnourished and undernourished, and the babies issue is a very big and real one. I'm patron of the Starfish Foundation, and I've been exposed to a huge amount of data and research into the grinding poverty, particularly in rural areas and in informal settlements and stuff. It's very real. But to dismiss South Africans as because you're poor, that makes you lazy and stupid, is the most bigoted and vulgar thing that you could ever do. Given the opportunity, South Africans are astonishingly resourceful. And if there was not a robust and astonishingly powerful informal sector in South Africa, the revolution would have happened along with the Arab Spring. Yes. It's not to say that everything is going right, not by any stretch of the imagination. But if you can provide data and mechanisms, and there's something, the Yoko founder, Katlego Mapai, his main mission in life, and his co-founders at Yoko, is to bring people into the formal economy, to show them the benefits of having data, the benefits of tracking your expenditure, the benefits of tracking your income, the benefits, dare I even suggested, falling into the tax net. Because the moment you have auditable accounts, somebody is prepared to lend you money.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, last point, sorry.
Yes. No.
Give people a stake in the future, and
this
they
is
will
the internet.
think.
We can carry on as long as we like until people run out of data.
People who have no stake in the future, people who cannot believe that the future is better than the present, have got absolutely zero interest in working towards a better future.
I think that,
and that is the most important thing.
You're asking about the state of the nation. You should never have started. I think we've got an incredible amount of creativity.
Yes.
Which I think is lacking in some of those developed countries, because why do you need to be creative? Everything's done for you. We've had to be creative. The boer maak 'n plan thing is real, right?
Well, everybody makes plans, not just the boer.
Yeah, but I'm saying that sort of thing is
that notion,
the notion is across the board in South Africa. So that makes me, if one compares, for example, a place like China, where level of creativity is really low.
Well, people aren't, it is, again, state-run economy, state-run everything, where people have become increasingly creative. I mean, it has become the world's factory, and people have created remarkable things, some of it with IP infractions in the Western world.
Because they can't create their own.
No, that's also not true. There is a huge amount of innovation. You just look at the level of the EVs coming out of China at the moment, the ranges that are being delivered, the quality that's being delivered. You're looking at Matthew, is he scary? Does he frighten you? Your own son frighten you?
Putting stuff on the screen, and I was wondering about it.
Okay. You shouldn't be looking at that sort of stuff. You should talk to him. But yeah, we can go down many rabbit holes. But the final point here, Mike, we've got to give people a sense that the future is better than the present. Yes. that if we can turn around Eskom, as I chatted to Mteto Nyati at the launch of this book, if we can begin the fix of Eskom, surely anything else is possible.
You know, Bruce, another thing that makes me very positive has been that, the ANC has gifted South Africa a couple of things. One is that they've been so bad at what they've done that it's destroyed the liberation movement myth, which if you look at places like Mozambique and Zimbabwe is still very much alive, Angola. So they have self-immolated, which is brilliant. They've also been so bad at, they've tried to create a big state, but they've been so bad at running it. So people have had to learn for themselves and become creative again, because the one last step that they failed to get over the line, I feel, is that the one thing that all of these movements desperately need is total dependence on the state.
I would disagree with you in that.
Of course.
I've got to disagree with you. The first 15 years of this democracy were remarkable.
Yeah.
We came out of junk status. We got back to a credit rating. We were investable. It was working really, really well. It wasn't perfect. But we created, between 1994 to 2008, about 5 or 6 million jobs in a much smaller population than we have today. People had incomes. There was money being spent. People were renovating properties. The city of Joburg was, as it was called back then, relatively close to a world-class African city. Not that we believed it then, but my goodness me, don't we?
We hanker for those days.
We hanker for those days. But now the guy who was running that world-class African city, Parks Tau, is now the Minister of Trade and Industry.
Yeah.
He's got a better head on his shoulders than his predecessors.
Yeah.
We've got a finance minister who comes from an ideological school within the ANC, but who has also challenged that ideological school within the ANC. Korongwana has been a very firm pair of hands and has, I think, done a notable job in calming down the fiscus, getting more fiscal control. And we are ticking more and more boxes of things that have to be done. But where this doesn't work, and I talk about a Zapiro cartoon from 2005, 2006, thereabouts. And it's a little boy reading a newspaper. His mum has got a baby on her back. She may be pregnant. She's scrubbing the floor, the stoop on a shack, and there's the glistening Joburg CBD in the background. And he's saying, "Good news, Mum, GDP data is up."
Yeah.
And unless we can make, and this is where I have, again, you listen to Pravin Gordhan and we'd fight a lot. And I'm not sorry that we did, because it was fun. But he would talk about inclusivity and inclusive growth and all of, but we get so caught up in ideological terms that we lose focus on what's really important. And we have to get growth. We have to get optimism. We have to get more people into more jobs so that people can see the benefit and the dignity of having an income and the dignity of being part of a future. Right now, the vast majority of South Africans, a young guy in advertising says, "I'm not proud of my country." Now that's tragic for a young black South African to say, "I'm not proud of my country," is tragic.
Yeah.
Let's get proud. And the Springboks can't do it all by themselves.
Can't do it.
You must see here, I mean, the number of people. So I try to get hold of Nick Benadell. Nick Benadell travels, he's also an international man of mystery, and he travels extensively, teaching all over the place and studying things. He's really, really very active. And I said to him, "So what would you do?" "No, I'd put Imtiaz Suleiman in charge of social development." I said, "Have you asked Imtiaz if he wants to go do social development?" He goes, "No, but he must." I say to Imtiaz Suleiman, "Do you want to do social development?" "No, I don't. I can do more good outside than in. Go away." Grant Patterson says he'd put 10 billion rand into a fund and make Sia the Minister of Sport and Rassi the Deputy. And they could get sport into every school, and that would give people a sense of... And it's a lovely idea. Has anybody asked Sia and Rassi if they want that terrible job? No. Again, we're very quick to say to others, "Why don't you go and do that?" Why don't you do it? Because I think you've got a really good idea there, Mike. Why don't you go and do that? I'm just going on holiday, or I'm too busy, or whatever the case is. A lot of people are really angry about the level of tax they pay and saying my tax money gets wasted. Absolutely. Well, you're going to still keep driving on crappy roads and having to fix your car often, and your insurance premiums go through the roof. If we don't start with our own one things.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been trying to say goodbye to Bruce for the last
One more
15
thing.
minutes.
It's the one thing.
It's the one thing by Bruce Whitfield.
And friends. You see, and
And
here,
friends.
Bruce Whitfield and company.
Oh,
I give credit.
There you go. You did. And if you're still watching us, Support Pace Car Rental because they're a little business that's growing. They are a car rental business around the country. They help keep us on the air. You help keep us on the air by subscribing to the State of the Nation. Bruce, we're going to catch you the next time you're in Johannesburg, or Gotham City as we call it now. And we'll see you again. And to everybody that's joined us today, Bruce, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Wonderful. Go out and buy the book. And,
or you can share it. Buy one and share it with your family. I don't mind.
Yeah, well, we won't tell him. But
the numbers will tell me.
The numbers will tell Bruce. But thank you so much. And we'll see you the next time on the State of the Nation. Thank you.